The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council chambers stretched high above the assembled delegates, its walls pulsing with soft blue light that cast dancing shadows across the nervous faces of representatives from dozens of worlds. Ambassador Zixithara of the Valonian Empire stood at the center podium, her forearms trembling slightly as she activated the holographic display that would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare. The image that appeared showed a small, unremarkable ship drifting in the darkness of space near the Outer Rim territories. It looked fragile compared to the massive war vessels that patrolled the galaxy's trade routes, with smooth curves and what appeared to be decorative markings along its hull. The ship belonged to a species that called themselves humans, from a world they named Earth in a system designated Sol 3 by the Galactic Mapping Authority. 3 weeks earlier, Commander Jake Murphy had been leading a routine exploration mission aboard the UES Horizon when long-range sensors detected unknown energy signatures in the Kepler 442 system. Following standard first contact protocols, Murphy had ordered his ARI crew to approach slowly and transmit universal greeting codes on all known frequencies. The response had been immediate and friendly, with the alien vessel's captain introducing herself as someone called Captain Lisa Bennett. What should have been a peaceful first meeting between two civilizations had turned into something that would haunt the nightmares of military strategists across the galaxy for years to come. As the two ships moved closer together for the traditional exchange of cultural data and basic trade information, 12 massive vessels had dropped out of hyperspace around them. The Raider fleet was led by Warlord Krenix, a brutal commander, known throughout the outer territories for his lightning-fast attacks on defenseless merchant vessels. His ships were each 3 times the size of the human vessel, armed with plasma cannons that could vaporize a city block and protected by energy shields that had never been penetrated by conventional weapons. Krenix had expected an easy victory, perhaps even 2 prizes for his collection. The communication that followed had been recorded by both ships and later analyzed by the galaxy's best tactical experts. Krenix had demanded immediate surrender from both vessels, threatening to destroy them if they attempted to flee or fight back. The Valonian captain had immediately powered down weapons and prepared to surrender, following standard protocols for dealing with overwhelming force. Captain Bennett's response had been different. Her voice had remained calm and steady as she politely thanked Krenix for the warning and informed him that surrender was not something humans typically considered when faced with hostile forces. She had then ordered her crew to battle stations and began maneuvering her ship into what appeared to be a suicide attack against the Raider flagship. What happened next defied every principle of space combat that had been developed over thousands of years of galactic civilization. Instead of engaging in the traditional exchange of long-range fire that characterized most space battles, the human ship had accelerated directly toward the center of the Raider formation while performing a series of impossible turns and rolls that should have torn the vessel apart. The Raiders had opened fire with everything they possessed, filling the space around the human ship with enough destructive energy to obliterate a small moon. The humans had somehow avoided 90% of the incoming fire through maneuvers that seemed to predict where each shot would be aimed before the Raiders themselves knew they were going to fire. When hits did connect with the human vessel, the damage appeared to be minimal, as if their hull was designed to absorb and redirect energy in ways that violated known physics. Dr. Alex Carter, the expedition's xenobiologist who had been aboard the Valonian ship, had managed to record the entire engagement from multiple angles using advanced sensor equipment. His analysis of the battle footage had revealed tactical innovations that made seasoned military commanders question everything they thought they knew about combat. The humans had not simply fought the Raiders. They had systematically dismantled them using weapons and tactics that appeared almost supernatural in their effectiveness. Instead of trying to match the Raiders' superior firepower, they had turned the enemy's strengths against them by using the larger ship's size and mass as disadvantages in close-range combat. Captain Bennett had brought her ship so close to the Raider vessels that their own weapons could not target her without risking damage to their neighboring ships. She had then proceeded to use surgical strikes against specific systems, disabling engines and weapon arrays with precision that suggested an understanding of Raider ship design that should have been impossible for a species making first contact. Within 17 minutes, the entire Raider fleet was either destroyed or disabled, their crews either dead or begging for mercy from an enemy they could not understand or predict. The human ship had emerged from the battle with only minor hull damage and no casualties among its crew of 43 beings. The recording of Captain Bennett's final transmission to the defeated raiders had become the most studied piece of military communication in galactic history. She had offered medical assistance to survivors and safe passage to any neutral port, treating former enemies with a combination of professionalism and compassion that other species found difficult to comprehend after such a decisive victory. Council, Director Mordak, a veteran of 7 major galactic conflicts, had assigned Special Investigator Yenna Cross to compile a comprehensive threat assessment of this new species. Her preliminary findings had been disturbing enough to warrant the emergency session that was now taking place in the Crystal Dome chambers. The humans, according to Cross's initial research, had evolved on a world that appeared designed to kill them. Their planet was covered with massive oceans that could swallow continents, weather systems that could level cities, and geological activity that regularly reshaped entire regions. The life forms that shared their world included creatures that could hunt and kill humans with ease. Yet somehow the species had not only survived, but had developed technology advanced enough to reach the stars. Even more concerning was the evidence that humans had spent most of their recorded history fighting wars against each other using increasingly sophisticated methods of destruction. They had developed military tactics and strategies through constant conflict, testing their innovations in battles that had claimed millions of lives over thousands of years of continuous warfare. The galaxy was facing something it had never encountered before. A species that was naturally gifted at warfare not through biological advantages or technological superiority, but through pure adaptive intelligence and an apparent refusal to accept defeat under any circumstances. They were survivors from a world that had tried to kill them every day of their existence, and they had learned to fight back against impossible odds with a creativity and determination that terrified anyone who understood its implications. 6 months had passed since the incident that shook the foundations of galactic military thinking, and the massive space station known as Kepler Station had been transformed into something the galaxy had never seen before. The neutral world that once served as a simple trading post now housed the most advanced military academy in known space, its gleaming corridors filled with the greatest warriors and tactical minds from every corner of civilized space. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Hayes stepped off the transport shuttle and immediately felt the weight of hundreds of alien eyes studying his every movement. The human contingent that accompanied him was small compared to the massive delegations from other species, but their presence seemed to fill the entire docking bay with an energy that made even the most experienced warriors feel uneasy. Sergeant, First Class Maria Santos carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen real combat. Her equipment pack containing tools and weapons that looked deceptively simple compared to the advanced technology displayed by other species. The other human advisors moved with a fluid grace that suggested constant awareness of their surroundings, a trait that the galaxy's military observers had already begun to associate with human survival instincts. The welcoming ceremony in the station's main amphitheater brought together the most elite fighting forces the galaxy had to offer. The Krillian hegemony had sent their finest honor guards, warriors bred for combat over dozens of generations, whose natural armor could deflect energy weapons and whose strength could crush steel with bare hands. The Etherian collective contributed their tactical masters, beings whose enhanced intellects could process battlefield information at superhuman speeds and coordinate complex strategies across multiple fronts simultaneously. The Orcish clans had chosen their most feared berserker champions, fighters whose rage-induced transformations turned them into living weapons capable of tearing through enemy formations like forces of nature. Each delegation numbered in the dozens, representing centuries of military tradition and thousands of years of accumulated battlefield experience. The human delegation looked almost pathetic by comparison. 8 men and women in simple uniforms, carrying basic equipment, and displaying none of the obvious physical advantages or technological superiority that marked the other groups as dangerous. Many of the alien observers exchanged glances that suggested they were wondering if the reports about human combat effectiveness had been greatly exaggerated. General Thexmore of the Titan Confederacy, chosen as the Academy's director due to his experience in 17 major galactic conflicts, announced that the first war games would begin immediately. The scenario was designed to test basic tactical competence, a simulated urban combat environment where teams would compete for control of strategic objectives while avoiding civilian casualties and managing limited resources. Captain Kevin Miller was assigned to lead the human squad against a combined force of 42 alien warriors, representing the best fighters from 6 different species. The odds seemed so heavily stacked against the humans that many observers expected the exercise to serve as a demonstration of human limitations rather than capabilities. The urban environment was a perfect replica of a typical galactic city, complete with towering spires, underground tunnels, vehicle traffic, and thousands of holographic civilians going about their daily business. The objective was simple: capture and hold 3 strategic points while eliminating or neutralizing enemy forces. Standard rules applied regarding civilian protection and resource conservation. What followed challenged every assumption the galaxy held about warfare. Instead of attempting to match their opponent's superior numbers and firepower through direct confrontation, the humans immediately disappeared into the urban landscape like ghosts. Their first action was not to secure obvious tactical positions, but to spend precious time studying the environment itself, mapping traffic patterns, identifying structural weaknesses, and observing civilian behavior. The alien forces moved according to established doctrine, securing high ground, establishing perimeter defenses, and advancing in coordinated formations toward the designated objectives. Their tactics were flawless according to every military manual in the galactic database, executed with precision that demonstrated years of training and natural advantages that should have made victory inevitable. The humans attacked from directions that should not have existed. They emerged from storm drains, descended from building ventilation systems, and appeared behind enemy lines through routes that military engineers insisted were impossible to navigate. They used the urban environment as both weapon and shield, turning everyday objects into tactical advantages with a creativity that left observers speechless. Sergeant Santos demonstrated engineering skills that bordered on miraculous, creating improvised weapons and defensive positions from materials found in the simulation environment. A simple construction site became a fortress. Street lighting was transformed into a communication network, and vehicle traffic was redirected to create barriers and distractions that confused enemy movements. The alien forces found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to behave according to any known tactical doctrine. The humans would retreat when victory seemed certain, attack when defeat appeared inevitable, and consistently chose strategies that seemed designed to fail, but somehow achieved impossible success. They broke rules that other species did not even know existed. Captain Miller's squad completed the exercise in 17 minutes, achieving total victory while suffering 0 casualties and causing minimal damage to the simulated civilian population. The alien forces, despite their overwhelming advantages in numbers, technology, and natural abilities, had been systematically outmaneuvered and defeated by an enemy they could not predict or understand. The aftermath of the first war games sent shockwaves through the galactic military establishment. Emergency meetings were called, tactical manuals were questioned, and training programs that had remained unchanged for centuries were suddenly considered inadequate. The humans had not simply won, they had demonstrated that the galaxy's understanding of warfare was fundamentally incomplete. Major Sam Peterson began teaching courses that revolutionized galactic military thinking. His lectures on unconventional warfare drew standing-room-only crowds of military leaders who listened in stunned silence as he explained concepts that challenged their most basic assumptions about combat. The idea that winning could sometimes require losing, that strength could be weakness, and that the best strategy might be to abandon strategy entirely. His classes on asymmetric tactics were attended by generals and admirals who had commanded fleets and armies across dozens of worlds. They learned that humans did not simply fight battles, they fought wars in ways that other species could not even conceptualize. Every engagement was part of a larger pattern. Every defeat was preparation for ultimate victory, and every victory was merely a step toward achieving objectives that other species had never considered possible. General Thexmore submitted his classified report to the Galactic Council, with hands that trembled as he wrote the final recommendation. The humans were not just another warrior species to be cataloged and understood. They were something entirely new in the galaxy's experience. Making them enemies would be the last mistake any civilization would ever have the opportunity to make. The emergency beacon that pierced through the darkness of the Centauri Nebula carried with it the most terrifying words any galactic citizen could hear. The collective had arrived. Admiral Patricia Webb stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching as the tactical display updated with information that made her blood run cold. 17 star systems had already fallen to the hive mind entity, known throughout the galaxy as the ultimate nightmare scenario. The collective was unlike any enemy the galaxy had ever faced, because it was not truly an enemy in the traditional sense. It was a single consciousness spread across millions of individual drone bodies, each one sharing thoughts and experiences instantaneously with every other member of the vast network. When one drone learned something, they all knew it immediately. When one discovered a weakness in enemy defenses, the entire force adapted within seconds. Vega Colony housed over 40 million beings from dozens of different species, making it one of the most densely populated civilian centers in the Outer Rim territories. The distress signals coming from the colony painted a picture of absolute horror as collective drones swarmed through the settlements, converting everything they touched into extensions of their hive mind. Resistance was not just futile, it was impossible when facing an enemy that could predict every move before it was made. The Galactic Defense Force had developed containment protocols specifically for dealing with hive mind entities, but those strategies had been designed for much smaller threats. The collective represented something on a scale that the galaxy's military planners had never imagined possible. Their standard response of coordinated fleet movements and strategic bombardment had failed catastrophically when the enemy could anticipate every tactical decision and counter it before orders were even given. Admiral Webb received the desperate communication from Galactic Command while her fleet was conducting routine training exercises 3 light-years from the crisis zone. The colony had perhaps 6 hours before complete assimilation, and the nearest Defense Force fleet was scattered across 3 different sectors, unable to mount any kind of coordinated response in time to make a difference. The orders from Galactic Command were clear and reasonable. Maintain position, avoid engagement with collective forces, and await reinforcements that would arrive too late to save anyone on Vega Colony. Admiral Webb read those orders twice, looked at the tactical display showing millions of innocent lives about to be consumed by an unstoppable force, and made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Colonel Tony Jackson had been developing experimental combat tactics based on observations of how humans naturally organize themselves during crisis situations. His Pack Tactics unit represented a completely different approach to military coordination, one that seemed to contradict everything the galaxy understood about effective command and control structures. Instead of operating as a unified force following orders from a central authority, his teams were trained to function as independent units that could make their own decisions while somehow maintaining overall mission cohesion. The concept had been difficult for galactic military theorists to understand because it required a level of trust and communication that other species found almost impossible to achieve. Human soldiers could operate without direct orders, adapting to changing circumstances by relying on shared understanding of objectives rather than specific instructions. They could coordinate complex maneuvers through subtle signals and intuitive responses that looked like chaos to outside observers, but achieved results that formal tactics could not match. The battle that followed became the stuff of legends throughout the galaxy, studied in military academies and analyzed by strategic experts who still struggled to understand exactly how the impossible had been achieved. Admiral Webb ordered the Defiance and her escort vessels to jump directly into the collective swarm surrounding Vega Colony, ignoring every principle of safe engagement that had been developed over centuries of space warfare. The collective hive mind immediately began analyzing the human ships and their movement patterns, preparing countermeasures based on millions of years of accumulated experience dealing with threats to their expansion. They anticipated standard attack formations, coordinated weapon volleys, and desperate attempts to break through their defensive perimeter using superior firepower or advanced technology. What they encountered instead was something that broke their primary advantage for the first time in their existence. Lieutenant Commander Nicole Price led a stealth insertion team that began targeting specific nodes in the collective's communication network, but instead of trying to destroy them, she began feeding them carefully crafted false information that exploited the hive mind's greatest strength. The humans had realized that perfect communication could become a devastating weakness when that communication carried lies designed to spread confusion throughout the entire network. Price's team used the collective's own coordination systems against them, introducing contradictory data that caused different sections of the hive mind to work against each other without realizing what was happening. While the collective struggled to process the chaotic and seemingly random movements of human forces that operated without centralized command, Sergeant Danny Clark infiltrated their central coordination hub on the planet's surface. His mission was not to plant explosives or disable equipment, but to introduce something far more dangerous, a logic virus that would turn the hive mind's perfect reasoning against itself. The virus was elegant in its simplicity, creating recursive loops of analysis that caused the collective to become trapped in endless cycles of self-examination. Every attempt to solve the problem created new problems that demanded investigation, and every investigation revealed contradictions that required further analysis. The hive mind that had consumed 17 star systems found itself paralyzed by its own need to understand what was happening to it. The rescue of Vega Colony was completed in less than 4 hours, with the collective forces either destroyed or fleeing in confusion as their coordination network collapsed into chaos. The few hundred humans who had participated in the battle had defeated an enemy that had been considered unstoppable by every military authority in the galaxy. The psychological impact of the victory spread through galactic civilization like wildfire. For the first time in living memory, someone had found a way to defeat the ultimate nightmare, and that someone was the strange new species that seemed to approach every challenge from directions that no one else had considered possible. The galaxy watched the recordings of the battle and realized that humanity represented something fundamentally different from every other form of life they had encountered. These were not just warriors who could fight effectively. They were problem solvers who refused to accept that any challenge was impossible to overcome. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before the massive holographic display in the Galactic Institute of Strategic Studies, surrounded by the most brilliant minds in xenopsychology and military theory. The question that had consumed the galaxy's intellectual community for months glowed in soft blue letters above her head. What made humans so impossibly effective at warfare when they possessed no obvious physical or technological advantages over dozens of other species? The research project had begun as a simple academic exercise, but had evolved into something approaching an obsession among scholars who prided themselves on understanding the fundamental principles that governed all forms of life. Every species that had achieved spaceflight had done so by following predictable patterns of development, with military capabilities that matched their biological advantages and cultural evolution. The Krillians had natural armor and incredible strength, so they developed tactics based on direct confrontation and overwhelming force. The Etherians possessed enhanced intelligence and technological mastery, leading them to create strategies that relied on superior equipment and precise coordination. The Orcish clans channeled their rage into berserker tactics that turned individual warriors into forces of destruction. Humans appeared to have none of these advantages. They were physically weaker than most warrior species, lacked the natural weapons that many predators possessed, and their technology was impressive but not revolutionary compared to galactic standards. Yet somehow they had achieved military results that made veterans of 1,000 battles question everything they thought they knew about combat. Captain Brad Williams had been assigned as military liaison to the research project, providing practical insights that complemented the theoretical analysis being conducted by the academic team. His explanations of human military philosophy challenged concepts that other species considered fundamental truths about the nature of warfare. The idea that losing a battle could be part of winning a war was almost incomprehensible to military minds, trained in traditional galactic doctrine. Most species fought to win every engagement because their survival instincts demanded immediate victory over any threat. Humans somehow possessed the ability to accept temporary defeat as a tool for achieving larger objectives, sacrificing short-term advantages to gain long-term strategic benefits. Even more disturbing was the human concept of breaking their own rules when circumstances demanded it. Other species developed military codes based on their cultural values and biological limitations, then followed those codes as sacred principles that defined their identity as warriors. Humans created rules and traditions but seemed to view them as tools rather than absolute laws, abandoning them without hesitation when they became obstacles to victory. Dr. Rodriguez discovered that human warfare was fundamentally different because it was based on adaptation rather than optimization. While other species perfected specific approaches to combat, humans had developed the ability to become whatever type of warrior the situation required. They could switch between being honorable defenders, ruthless pragmatists, or something that could only be described as forces of nature. The study revealed that this adaptability came from humanity's unique evolutionary history. Earth was a world where survival required constant change and innovation. Climate shifts, geological disasters, and ecological upheavals had forced human ancestors to develop mental flexibility as their primary survival tool. They became persistence hunters who could chase prey for days, social creatures who could cooperate with strangers, and survivors who had faced extinction multiple times and refused to accept defeat. General Michelle Turner demonstrated this adaptability during a series of wargame scenarios that became legendary among galactic military observers. In one simulation, she played the role of a noble protector, using tactics based on honor and sacrifice to defend civilian populations against overwhelming odds. Her forces fought with courage and discipline that impressed even the most traditional warrior cultures. In the second scenario, General Turner transformed into something entirely different. Faced with an enemy that could not be defeated through honorable combat, she became a ruthless strategist who used deception, psychological warfare, and tactics that other species considered unsporting or even dishonorable. Her victory was complete and achieved with minimal casualties on her side. The third simulation revealed something that genuinely frightened the observers. When conventional tactics and ruthless strategy both proved insufficient, Turner became something that could only be described as a force of natural destruction. She abandoned all rules of engagement, used every available resource regardless of cost, and pursued victory with an intensity that suggested she would rather die than accept defeat. Each transformation was complete and convincing, as if Turner was genuinely becoming a different type of warrior, rather than simply following different tactical doctrines. The observers realized they were witnessing something unprecedented, a species that could embody every form of warfare that had ever been developed, switching between them as circumstances demanded. The implications were staggering. Every other species in the galaxy was limited by their nature, capable of excelling in specific types of combat but vulnerable to enemies who could exploit their limitations. Humans appeared to have no fixed limitations because they could adapt their entire approach to warfare based on what their opponents expected or feared most. Captain Williams explained that human military training emphasized principles rather than procedures. While other species taught their warriors to follow established patterns of behavior, humans learned to think creatively and solve problems independently. They studied the tactics of every warrior culture they encountered, not to copy them but to understand when and how to use them most effectively. The research team's final report sent shockwaves through the galactic military establishment. Humanity was not just another warrior species to be cataloged and understood. They were something entirely new in the galaxy's experience. They were every type of warrior that had ever existed, all contained within a single species that could become whatever the situation required. The galaxy began to understand that humanity's greatest weapon was not their adaptability or their creativity, or even their refusal to accept defeat. It was their complete lack of limitation by any single approach to warfare. They were honorable when honor served their purposes, ruthless when mercy would cost lives, and destructive when destruction was the only path to peace. They were not bound by the biological and cultural constraints that limited every other species, because they had evolved to survive in a world that constantly changed the rules. They had learned to change with it, and that ability made them the most dangerous opponents any civilization could face. 2 years had passed since the first human ship had appeared in galactic space, and the crystal dome of the Galactic Council chambers had never hosted a more important session in its 1,000-year history. Representatives from every known civilization filled the vast amphitheater, their faces reflecting the mixture of awe and fear that had come to define the galaxy's relationship with humanity. Ambassador Jennifer Stone walked to the central podium with the quiet confidence that had become the hallmark of human diplomats. The proposal she carried would reshape the fundamental structure of galactic civilization, offering something that no species had ever suggested in the Council's long history. Instead of requesting protection, trade agreements, or territorial rights, humanity was offering to become the galaxy's guardians. The proposal document that appeared on every delegate's display screen outlined a role that had never existed before. Humans would serve as peacekeepers for conflicts that traditional diplomacy could not resolve, protectors for worlds that could not defend themselves, and rapid response forces for crises that threatened galactic stability. They asked for nothing, except the opportunity to belong to the community they had fought to protect. The demonstration that followed would be remembered as the moment when the galaxy truly understood what it meant to have humans as allies rather than enemies. Commander Scott Baker had been assigned to lead a peacekeeping mission to the Sigma Draconis system, where 3 species had been locked in a war that had raged for over 2 centuries. The Harakan, Zephyrian, and Malari peoples had been fighting over control of valuable mining rights on a cluster of asteroids that contained rare minerals essential for faster-than-light travel. Each species possessed legitimate historical claims to the territory, and generations of conflict had created grievances that seemed impossible to resolve through conventional negotiation. Previous peacekeeping efforts had failed because they focused on finding compromise solutions that satisfied none of the combatants. The Galactic Mediation Service had spent decades trying to divide the territory fairly, establish shared mining operations, or create compensation packages that would convince one or more parties to abandon their claims. Every attempt had failed, because the conflict had become about more than resources. Commander Baker approached the problem from a direction that surprised everyone involved. Instead of trying to resolve the territorial dispute, he created a framework that made the dispute irrelevant. His team established a joint defense alliance that protected all 3 species from external threats, a technology sharing program that benefited everyone, and a cooperative mining operation that generated more wealth than any single species could have achieved alone. The solution worked because it addressed the real underlying issues that had prolonged the conflict. The biome, 3 species had been fighting not just for resources but for security, recognition, and a sense of control over their own destiny. Baker's framework gave them all of these things while making continued warfare counterproductive and ultimately meaningless. Captain Helen Davis demonstrated similar innovation in her work with the Refugee Protection Service, establishing safe zones for displaced populations using methods that combined humanitarian aid with military precision. Her forces did not simply protect civilians from harm, they empowered them to protect themselves by teaching defensive strategies and organizational techniques that transformed victims into survivors. The refugee camps that Davis established became models for the entire galaxy, showing how temporary displacement could become an opportunity for rebuilding stronger communities. Her teams taught engineering skills that allowed refugees to construct better shelters, agricultural techniques that produced food in hostile environments, and defensive tactics that made camps too costly for raiders to attack. The Council's deliberations lasted for 3 days, with delegate after delegate rising to express their amazement at what humans had accomplished in such a short time. The Krillian representative spoke of honor being redefined. The Etherian delegate discussed tactical innovations that challenged their most advanced theories, and even the usually silent crystalline entities acknowledged that humanity represented something unprecedented in galactic history. The decision was unanimous but complex, reflecting the galaxy's understanding that integrating humanity would require creating entirely new categories of membership and responsibility. Humans would be granted full council representation and access to galactic technology and trade networks, but with a unique status that recognized their role as the community's protectors. President Robert Kane addressed the council chamber via quantum communication link from Earth, his words carrying the weight of a species that had earned its place among the stars through deeds rather than birthright. His acceptance speech was brief and powerful, acknowledging the trust being placed in humanity while making clear the commitment that came with such responsibility. The promise that Kane made to the galaxy became the foundation of human philosophy in the centuries that followed. Humans had not come to the stars to conquer or dominate, but to find their place in something larger than themselves. They would use their unique abilities not for personal gain, but to protect the peace and prosperity that all civilized beings deserved. The years that followed saw humanity fulfill that promise in ways that exceeded even the most optimistic expectations. Human peacekeepers became legendary figures who could end conflicts that had seemed permanent. Human defenders protected worlds that had been written off as hopeless, and human innovators solved problems that had puzzled the galaxy's greatest minds for generations. When young beings across the galaxy heard stories about the legendary human warriors, they would ask their elders why humans were considered so frightening, despite their small size and seemingly ordinary abilities. The answer became a standard part of galactic education, passed down through generations as a reminder of what made humanity special. Humans were feared not because they were evil or destructive, but because they were good in ways that challenged every assumption about the limitations of civilized behavior. They were warriors who fought for peace, predators who protected the innocent, and survivors who refused to let others suffer the losses they had learned to overcome. They looked at impossible situations and asked not whether something could be done, but how long it would take to accomplish it. They refused to accept defeat, failure, or the idea that any problem was too complex to solve. Most terrifying of all, they had proven that these attitudes were not just philosophical positions but practical approaches that achieved results when everything else failed. The galaxy had found its guardians, and they were exactly what every civilization needed but had never dared to hope could exist.